I've paid thousands of dollars in courses to learn what you're basically teaching on your podcast for free. What you're putting out there is so valuable. So, I just really want to acknowledge you, and I definitely send everyone to your podcast.
You were virtually one of the first mentors that I looked up to and started following. You're always one step ahead of the game. So I just wanted to give you kudos and props for that, because lots of people are watching, lots of people are learning from it.
Tucker and the whole TTM crew, Dan and Chris, thanks so much for your support. I love what you guys do, and a huge fan. Having this support's huge. So I'm grateful for that.
What's up, everybody out there in listener land? It's episode 273 of the Real Dealz podcast. And of course, I'm your host, Tucker Merrihew. I may have a little bit of a hoarse voice today. I'm on the tail end of a whirlwind couple of days. For those of you guys that were up in Seattle yesterday, I hit the road about 1 o'clock-ish, 12 or 1, and I was speaking at the Fixated event up there in Bellevue at about 6:30 till about 9:30, and then I hit the road and I road warriored it back to Portland because we got a lot going on today, and I just couldn't stay any longer. So I'm here, I'm back, but I had a couple hours that I was chatting to the crowd, which I don't know, there was probably 125, 175 people, something like that up there. So pretty big crowd. Thanks to everybody that showed up. But my voice is a little hoarse because I did a lot of talking last night too. But I wanted to record this week's show nonetheless. Dan's got a short week, and I got to get this in for you guys. So this is going to be it. Now, what am I going to talk about this week? Well, I've got a topic, one that is very relevant to my own business, one which it's a transaction that's we're dealing with now. It's something we've dealt with in the past, and it's something that I'm sure many of you have dealt with, or if you haven't, you will deal with at some point in the future. And that thing that I'm referring to is a low appraisal, right? AKA a bad appraisal in a lot of cases. So that's what I want to talk about this week. I want to demystify it. I want to talk about what you can do, what you can't do, and really what you're up against when one of those types of appraisals come in and potentially blow up your deal. We've got I've got a consulting client that had a couple of bad appraisals come in over the course of last week. I started talking to him. I had one come in. It's been a while. It wasn't one that I thought that even had a chance of coming in low, which makes me question a lot of things. But nonetheless, it's still an issue that you have to deal with. So I want to talk about everything that has to do with low appraisals and kind of talk with you guys about what your options are and what your options aren't, and how you can deal with it if you choose to do so. So that's this week's show. Before I get into all of that, first thing, as I always mention, if you are not already, as I talked about last night, our Driving for Dollars app, that was kind of the big focus of our marketing machine here. That's how we get in front of virtually every seller that we buy houses directly from. We utilize our Driving for Dollars app in order to get in front of them. So if you have not already, make sure you go download it. It's called the Driving for Dollars app. It's trademarked. That's right. We trademarked the phrase. It's in the iTunes store. It's in the Google Play Store. We have multiple tiers for depending on how big of a list you want to build and skip trace. And we have a fourth tier or a fifth tier. It's a new tier that'll be coming out this next week. That's all about just creating lists of properties, and then you can skip trace outside of the app, whether it be with us or somebody else. And that'll be just a super cheap version that you can use that really just organizes your properties, builds a list for you, and you can have your whole team do it. You can have bird dogs do it. You can have Uber drivers do it. You can have whoever you want do it to kind of help you build that asset, which is ultimately a Driving for Dollars list. So that's the first thing. Second thing is we're making a big push for folks to join our Deal Finders Academy Mastermind group. If you've been receiving the emails, I encourage you to click on the link, book a call with Dan, and we'd love to put you into a 5-year plus group that we've been running. 5 years is a long time, folks, and there's a ton of content, a lot of great people, and it's been around for 5 years, and a lot of the members that are in it now were original members from 5 years ago, so that says something. And there's also a lot of just really awesome people in the group that are doing amazing things from all over the country and all different parts of the real estate business in terms of asset class, multifamily, single family, you name it, somebody's doing it, and you can get feedback, you can get advice, and you can get tips and tricks and trade secrets within the group. So reach out to us if you've gotten the email, book a call with Dan, and we'd love to see if we can add you to the group. Now, what's going on with the TTM this week? Well, I kind of summarized it quickly, but I've been on the road for a while, for the last 24 hours. Last night was really fun, though. It was cool to see everybody. I saw a lot of you guys that I know that are up in the Seattle area, met some new people that I didn't, and, Tarl's events are always fun. We're actually looking at potentially partnering with a group here in Portland. I don't want to put them on blast yet, but we're looking at maybe doing some type of a partnership. We're going to meet here in the next week. We're going to see what we can work out to try and create a local meetup as well, and really try and make a big one here that can kind of continually grow and become a focal point for the investor community here in the Portland area as well. So we're going to see what we can do about that. I was thinking about doing one purely on our own, but to be honest with you, I just don't think I have the bandwidth to organize and run it with everything else that we have going on with the, Sticks and Bricks company, the education company, technology company. We got a lot going on. And then I'm trying to put out a podcast a week on top of it all and run all these businesses. And I just don't have the bandwidth. I have the desire, but sometimes you just got to know when to say when on your bandwidth. And that's one of my biggest curses as an entrepreneur. And so anyway, I'm looking at potentially partnering with a couple of great guys and a great organization to expand, the meetup scene here in Portland, and hopefully it does some great things for everybody out there that's an investor here. So keep your ears out for that. I'll let you know once we have something formalized. Other than that, busy week of buying properties. We bought one yesterday. I'm on my way to the office. I got to wire some moolah. We're buying another one today, both of which are going to be sizable rehab projects. We wholesaled one last week to a friend of mine. He called. I guess I should probably not say his name, but he called me after he bought it, and he said that him and his contractor almost puked. So I apologize for the stinkiness of the house, but at the end of the day, you'll still do really well on it. So as I told him, it's kind of like ripping a Band-Aid off. Just gut that thing out, and then it won't stink anymore. But I got the call afterwards that he said that him and his contractor puked, which I felt a little bad, but I know he's going to make money. He'll do fine. But it's funny sometimes how much one house can possibly stink. It's amazing to me how much stench a house can hold. And on top of that, the people that were living in that house, they weren't on drugs. From what I can tell, they were, sort of normal people. They had a job, they went to work. But for whatever reason, they let the house go that far. They had pets, they had trash, they had all kinds of things. So usually when a house goes that far, it's because people are on drugs and they're just out of their mind. But when people that are normal, productive members of society live like that, it really makes you scratch your head. So anyway, that's one funny story. We obviously had a Low Appraisal come in this past week. We had some interesting banter with the agent on the other end of that. We were able to move forward, fortunately, for everybody's sake, but that was a little bit of a touch and go there for a while. A lot of emotions were flaring. And we're moving forward on our Dunthorpe project. We've got good progress going on, and we've got potentially a high-profile individual interested in buying it. We'll see if that sticks. If it does, of course, I'll announce it here on the show at the point that that's the case. But as it's starting to take shape, we're getting a lot more interest in the property, and it's going to be pretty damn cool. So anyway, that's the Cliff Notes version of what's going on with me and TTM over the course of the past week. I'm going to limit it to that because I want to get into the main topic this week and the rest of the show. So without further ado, let's get into it.
All right, Real Dealz podcast listeners, I want to talk quickly about our show's sponsor, Iron Bridge Lending. If you guys have not reached out to Iron Bridge already to talk to them about funding some of your upcoming flip projects, I highly encourage you to do so. I've known the owner of Iron Bridge for a very long time. I've personally borrowed millions of dollars from them over the years to do a number of different projects, and I can say without a doubt, they are the best hard money lending company I have ever come across, and that is the reason why they are the sole sponsor of this show. I've had a lot of other companies reach out to me and want to sponsor this show, but I just won't do it. I feel like I need to be genuine in who we have sponsoring the show, and it needs to be somebody that I've personally done a ton of business with. So I personally vouch for their ability to be the best, hands down, in the world of hard money lending. You won't find better programs, you won't find better terms, and they're lending or will be lending in over 20 states. So chances are, if you're hearing this in whatever state you're in, it's definitely worth it to check out their website, reach out to them, see if they're lending in your state, and if they are, I would absolutely encourage you to do business with them. Another very cool thing to note is that they have a program for most rehabs where you can actually borrow up to 90% of the purchase price. Now, this is given the fact that you are actually buying a deal, which If you're listening to the show, that means you probably are. But if you have an actual deal on the table, they'll fund up to 90% of your purchase price, and they'll even give you rehab funds on top of that, which means that it only takes 10% down to get into a project, which is unbelievable in the hard money world. So do yourself a favor, reach out to Iron Bridge Lending, have a conversation with them, see if they're a good fit for you and for your next project. I can guarantee you that you'll be happy that you did. All right, guys, main topic time. And this week's main topic, as I mentioned in the intro, is low appraisals, right? Or just appraisals in general. Let's talk about them. I mean, appraisals in general are a little bit boring, so let's talk about low appraisals too. But I want to give you guys a little bit of background, right? A lot of you are in this business or have been in this business since the appraisal business itself, which is its own little thing that kind of connects to everything else, right? You got lenders, you got real estate agents, you got appraisers, you got title people. The appraisal business itself went through a big change back in, I believe it was 2009. And during that time, a lot of the old school appraisers really just were kind of like, this sucks, what's going on? Their entire book of business of the relationships that they built became essentially worthless because all of the realtors they worked with, all the lenders they worked with, all of those professionals that they had built kind of relationships with over time now were meaningless type of relationships, unless, of course, they were friends, right? But as a business relationship, they were essentially meaningless because what happened is appraisal management companies came into play. And essentially what those are is a layer of separation between an appraiser and the individual who is ordering the appraisal. And the appraisal management companies take a fee, and they basically have appraisers sign up with them, and those appraisers then basically take the orders, and they go to an appraisal, and they turn it into the appraisal management company. The appraisal management company sends it out to whoever ordered it, right? So you create this separation. And that separation is what was supposed to curb all kinds of fraud, we'll call it. I could tell you stories for days on, fraud that did happen back in the day that I saw just by being in the business, right? Knowing a lot of, quasi-sketchy people at times that were in the lending business or that were in the lending business and in the realtor business. And what used to happen is, you'd get people that would want to refinance, for example, and the loan officer would get the appraiser to hit an ungodly value. And by doing so, you could get one loan at like 80% loan to value versus having to do two loans at 90% combined loan to value, something like that. Or, there were some pump and dump scams back in the day where an appraiser and a loan person would work together with a realtor where they'd basically inflate the price of the house and the appraiser would hit the value. There'd be a straw buyer. There'd be all kinds of stuff that went on. So that's why there was all this regulation put in place, and that's why these appraisal management companies were essentially another layer to separate the person doing the report from the person ordering the report so that you get a true value of the market. Now, what happens now is that you don't have any communication, at least in theory, right, with the appraiser that's doing the report. So there's this anonymity to it, which is good and bad. It's good in the sense that if an appraiser actually does their job right, you get a much truer recognition of value, right? Or the appraisal report gives you a much truer indicator of value, which at the end of the day, the value is really what somebody's willing to pay, right? The market dictates value, and appraiser just justifies what the market dictates. That's the way I see it. Appraisals are essentially worthless, I think, but they are a necessary checkpoint in a transaction. I think someday, probably pretty soon, most appraisals will be done online, and they'll be done via algorithm, and it'll just be a drive-by to make sure general condition is really all they're concerned about. Other than that, they're just validating what the market has already proved. But essentially what I'm getting at is that there's good appraisers and bad appraisers, right? So with this separation, you get appraisers that recognize that a market is willing to pay X, and they recognize that they need, comparables and adjustments and a report to show that price is X. And so they'll do their job and they'll make it, hit X. It's like, for example, when was the last time you did a transaction where an appraisal came in at $20,000 above the sale price? Probably virtually never, right? Because they never do. That's just the way it works. They basically try and hit whatever it is that the market says that something's worth. So on the flip side, though, occasionally, appraisals come in low, and they come in low for a variety of reasons. And I'll get into those reasons here in just a second on a couple stories of my own. But, I just want to give you guys a little background on appraisers and kind of who they are, right? Generally speaking, appraisers are just data collectors, right? They go out, they take some pictures, they take some measurements, they take data, they crunch it into a form that basically then gives you a value per square foot with all these adjustments. And I'll let you in on a little secret that they probably don't want people to know. A lot of them outsource their data inputting now. They have VAs essentially do it, right? So their VAs are taking data from all these other comparable sales and all these adjustments that they need data for, and they're inputting it for them. And then they just basically sign off on the report. That's really what it comes down to. And so that's why I think appraisals are pretty worthless at the end of the day. But the reality is that there's good appraisers and bad appraisers, as I mentioned. I know a couple. I'm not going to call them out on the show and name names, but I know one in particular. He's a good friend of mine, has been an appraiser for, I don't know, he's going on 12 years now. And he is a repeat offender at buying the worst houses when it comes to driveways. He bought the most fucked up driveway house I've ever seen in my life. And I say that not to swear, but to really accentuate the fact that he bought the worst driveway house I think I've ever seen in my life as an appraiser. And then he went and sold that at some point. But then he went and bought another one after that was not an easy sale, by the way. But then he went and bought another one where the first one was a downward sloping driveway. The second one was an upward sloping driveway. And I'm thinking to myself, what are you doing? You look at properties every single day. You appraise homes for value every single day. But then you go and buy a house like this. And then it dawned on me. They don't know marketability. They only know value. Now, that's not to say that all of them are like that. There's some that are smart guys. And I've talked to a number that are very smart. But on the average, most of them know value. They don't know marketability. And so that's a big challenge, right? Especially with some of the adjustments that they put in their reports. So that's kind of a little backstory on what the appraisal industry was and where it is now, and really ultimately what you get when you talk to appraisers, right? There's good ones and there's bad ones, just like with anything else, right? There's good doctors, there's bad doctors, there's good everything, there's bad everything, just like in the appraisal business. Now, in my world, right, I've had 3 low appraisals over the course of the last, 10 years, right? 3 low appraisals, that's it, not many. And coincidentally, the last name of the buying agent, which it's just the stats are what they are, 2/3 of those appraisals had the same buyer's agent, or at least from the same family tree, which is a very random stat, but stat nonetheless. But those 3 appraisals came in low for different reasons, right? The first one was an appraisal that came in low because it was our Street of Dreams house. It was the one that we built back in 2013. And it came in low because we were trying to proof a new price point in an area that didn't have $2 million homes. It didn't have them. So it made it very difficult. The appraiser had to really work hard. He had to go far. He had to pull comps that really weren't comps yet, but he had to make the best that he could because there wasn't that price point. There wasn't really a comparable street in the entire area of West Lynn where we built these homes. In Lake Oswego there was, but not in West Lynn. And so they came in low. I think the price, it ended up being, it was ridiculously low. I mean, he could have hit value, but he ended up being low, I think, by 50 grand. We got a second one that came in, or we got 2 appraisals. One came in at 1.85, one came in at 1.8, and then we agreed on 1.81. I think that was our final sale price. But I was kind of in a tough spot because, I looked at the report, I looked at the adjustment. There just weren't comps. It was very difficult to do. And that was the first one. And we ultimately worked out a compromise, and we ended up selling the house, of course, and it worked out, but we got a low appraisal, and it hurt our bottom line at the end of the day. The second one was an appraiser that missed horribly. Like, I'm talking, she missed by $120,000, like an insane amount on a $1 million home. And the reason why she missed is because she was pulling comps just straight out of her ass, really. I mean, she was pulling comps from a different part of Lake Oswego that was literally the affordable versus not affordable. There were some major thoroughfares that, and when I say not affordable, I just mean higher price point, but there were some major thoroughfares where values changed dramatically, and she did not take that into account one bit. And so she was pulling new construction from a completely different part of town, within the same town, but a different part of town, and she didn't have to, but she did, and I don't know why. She was very egotistical. We met her there, and I'll get into that here in a second on how you should handle this. She was just very difficult to deal with, very strong-headed, felt like she knew everything. In my opinion, she didn't know shit. But the appraisal came in 120 grand low. I met with the agent. I met with the buyer on that one because when the appraisal comes in 120 grand low, you got to meet with people. You can't just massage that one away with some phone calls. So I met with them, and I said, look, this is a terrible appraisal. It's horrible. I own a bunch of land in this area. We're going to be building all this land out. Here's our price points on where we're going to be putting all this stuff. Here's everybody else that's building and developing in this area. Here's the price points that they're putting stuff out at. This appraisal is just pure garbage. And so we've got two choices here. Number one is we take the agreed upon price that we had on the contract, and we move forward. And number two is you guys back out because of the appraisal, and I put this back on market, and we'll sell it to somebody else. And ultimately, they decided to buy it because they recognized that the appraisal was wrong, and we move forward. Now, a little Snapple fun fact for you. A year later, this individual ended up moving back to California, put the house on the market for $100,000 more than he bought it from us for, and sold it for full ask. So I wasn't wrong in our valuation at that point. That was about reasonable, proper, appreciation over that time. He got about, a little less than 10%. So we were correct on our value, no question. But in that case, he was also a cash buyer, and so, or pretty close. I think he had a 10% loan, or it was some ridiculously small loan amount. So all he did was just adjust his LTV slightly, and he just brought in the same amount of cash. And really, at the end of the day, it didn't matter, and the appraisal just was what it was. But it did add a lot of stress and pressure, and just a lot of challenge into the transaction that did not need to be there. It also did that on our Street of Dreams house. Now, our most recent one was one that I did not think was going to come in low at all. It was totally out of left field, and the appraiser missed by a little over 1% of the sale price. And so if you think about it like this, is an appraiser who spends, let's say, less than a half hour on a property, are they that good that they could be 1% better than what the market says that the property is worth? I don't think so. I don't think so at all. And so I actually went through this report. I went through all his adjustments. I went through all his comparables. And personally, I don't know what happened here, but he missed a value that he very easily could have gotten because, like I said, I wasn't worried about value hitting on this property, but he missed it. And my guess is that he just didn't spend much time in his reports, and he probably outsourced a lot of his data, like I mentioned earlier, and he just sent off a report that was, 1% low or a little over 1% low on value, missing the contract price, and no calls, no nothing, which that is a bad appraiser. At the end of the day, if an appraiser is not going to hit value, they at least should give you the courtesy of a phone call and say, hey, I'm having a hard time hitting value. Is there anything I'm missing here, right? They should at least do that. But this guy, nope, he missed it by 1% or a little over that, sent it over, no call, no nothing. It was a complete surprise to everybody, which says to me that this guy is a terrible appraiser. But those are the three appraisers that or three appraisals that I've had come in low over the last 6 or 7 years. There may have been a couple before that, back when, it was a little tougher to get value, but those are the ones that I remember most vividly and kind of how we went through them all. And so, this most recent one, we're closing the transaction. It's a little bit low. I don't like it, but it puts a seed of doubt in the buyer's mind of what the value is, even though that I know it's a terrible appraisal. It's a bogus appraisal, and the guy really should have just done a much better job at the end of the day, but it still causes problems for you. So what I want to go through now that I've kind of, gone through my stories of it and kind of the background of the appraisal industry, is how can you combat a low appraisal, right? Because you've got a number of ways to do it. And you've got before the appraisal comes in, and you've got after. And I've mentioned a couple of the before ones, but I'll go through them here and really line them out for you, because the last thing I want to happen to you guys is that you get a low appraisal and you didn't have to, right? That's number one. And number two is if you do get a low appraisal and you do the things that I talk about here on the before side to try and prevent it, what can you do after to try and mitigate your losses, or, basically mitigate your time on market and try and get to a closing, because we're in the business of turning over money, right? We're in the business of renovating houses and selling them. So before, what do you do? Well, number one is you make sure you meet the appraiser on site. We always do that. And we did that on our most recent one. We did. And, we probably should have done a better job at conveying what it is that was done to the home, what's new, although I don't think it would have mattered. This guy was just such a ding-dong that maybe it wouldn't have mattered. He did know that everything was redone, this and that, but generally speaking, if you meet an appraiser there and you go through everything that's been done to the house and you show them that everything is new and your house looks nice and new and it's staged and it's basically like new construction, generally they can do a quality adjustment, and that can be a big adjustment in value to really help you get the number that is needed or that the market has proved, right? Sometimes people bring comps. I'm a little 50-50 on comps, because sometimes when you bring comps, you're basically saying, here, you don't know how to do your job, so I did some comps for you. And so it can rub people the wrong way. So comps, I'm so-so on it. But I'm definitely all for an upgrade list, a list of everything that was done to the property or what's new, newer, why it should be accounted for in the valuation and the marketability of the property. Because like I said, remember, appraisers know data and values, but they do not know marketability. And sometimes you need to kind of remind them of that and remind them of the things that you did that not only improves the value, but improves the marketability as well. And the other thing I would do is get their contact info without question. Once this transaction closes that we're working on right now, I'll give this guy a call, and I'm not going to be a total a-hole because it really doesn't accomplish anything. But I'll tell you this guy is not going to appraise any of our properties ever again. He's on our blacklist just because I know he does a horrible job. And I'll just say, nope, you're going to have to find somebody else. But I would get their contact information, and I would encourage them, if they have any issues trying to get the value that is necessary in order to close the transaction at the agreed upon contract price, to reach out to you and at least give you a heads up that he's having challenges, and if you can help him in any way, you will, right? And at least that way you can kind of get ahead of it. And a lot of times that will curb any issues, and we've done that for years, all those things that I just talked about. And really that's why we've only had 3 in the last 6 or 7 years that I can remember, is because we do those things and we make sure we're basically filtering the appraiser, right? We're getting a gauge on how competent they are, and most of the time we get our gauge or our feeling on it is accurate. This most recent one, it was inaccurate. The one where we had a $120,000 low, Chris came back to the office and he was like, she was difficult. I don't know. And so I was prepared for what could be a challenging report, and it was very challenging. But we knew right away. This most recent one blindsided us a little bit. And then the one before that, I knew it was going to be challenging just because we were trying to proof a new price point that didn't exist in that area. Now, let's move on to another part of this, right? Let's say a low appraisal comes in. Let's say you did those things or you didn't do those things, and let's say a low appraisal came in. And this is where you need to do some kind of preventative stuff, or maybe, just mitigation type stuff for you and your business. How do you deal with it, right? Well, number one, let's talk about FHA versus conventional. If it's an FHA appraisal, you're kind of screwed because you got 6 months where that appraisal follows the property around. It has an FHA file number or case number assigned to the appraisal. And if that happens, then within FHA's mind, that home is worth that number for 6 months. And there's nothing that you can do about it. So that's something to think about when you accept an FHA loan buyer versus a conventional buyer. Now, if you're conventional, there isn't that requirement, right? There is nothing that report attaches to other than the lender itself, right? So if you go to a loan officer or mortgage broker, let's call it, and they have a number of different banks that they can go to, or wholesale lenders to do mortgages, if they go through one and they order this appraisal, and this appraisal goes to that wholesale lender who's ultimately going to fund the deal and that underwriting staff, and they look at it, even if you get another appraisal, they're still going to take the lower of 2 appraisals. So basically what you're going to end up having to do is go to a completely different lender in order to get it done. So it is challenging, but it can be done. With FHA, you can't even go FHA. So you got 2 options there. Number one is you can see if there's any way for those buyers to use some sort of a conventional Flex 97 program or low down payment conventional programs, which are out there these days. And really, FHA is not that great of a program because you've got mortgage insurance premium you got to pay up front. You got a mortgage insurance premium you have to pay every month in your payment. It's not a great program. It really isn't, but it's what's pushed as the first-time homebuyer loan. But anyway, point is that if it's FHA, just remember, if your offer is FHA, if that appraisal comes in low and you're selling to mainly FHA buyers, you're in a much more difficult situation than if you're selling to conventional buyers and that appraisal comes in low, because really all you need to do is just switch lenders at that point, and you could get another appraisal that does come into value and you can move forward. Now, the problem there is that once you get a low appraisal, it does sow a few seeds of doubt in the buyer's mind on value, whether they're valid or not. Those seeds of doubt are there, and some buyers can look past it, other ones cannot. Some like to argue about it, some don't. It just depends on who you get, right? At the end of the day, we've had both, and that's really what it comes down to. So lastly, well, I guess really what it comes down to is, do you want to do a second report, right? And if you do a second report, if you have a conventional lender and that number comes in higher, you still have the first one to deal with, as I mentioned. So FHA, you've got 6 months, you got to wait it out, or you take that value. Conventional, you get a second report, but it's really not going to do you any good. So that second report should really be ordered, or that second appraisal report should be ordered through a different lender, so that way the new lender is just underwriting based on a valid appraisal or a better appraisal. But you have to have the buyers on board with that. So that's how to deal with it, both FHA and conventionally. Now, on the third front here is that sometimes it's just too low, right? Like 20 grand or more, generally, it's just too low to make the deal work. So you've got to take evasive maneuvers. You can't meet in the middle or something like that, because that's another option, right? You can meet in the middle, which is generally the kosher way to do it, or at least meet somewhere there, right? And recognize that the appraiser should have done a better job, and that, the value is there. It's the real estate agent's job to help explain that to the buyer as well. And if they don't, then they're not doing a very good job, in my opinion, also. But really, if appraisal comes in way low, it may blow up the deal. And that's just the reality of it. And that's why you want to get ahead of it sometimes. And so if it does come in way low, you've got to, like I said, go to a different lender. You've got to flip from a FHA loan program to a conventional loan program, both with low down payments, or you got to meet in the middle somewhere, which is challenging with low down payment people, because then they've got to bring cash to the table. They can't factor that into their loan. And so really you want to get ahead of it. So that's kind of what it is. When you get low appraisals, there is no easy answer to it. There's no easy path to, solving that problem. It's going to take some challenging conversations. It's going to take some thought. It's going to take some people recognizing that it's just one report that is a quick snapshot of value based on data, has nothing to do with marketability, and they can miss, and they miss, quite often. Fortunately, we've only had a handful, less than a handful in the past 6 or 7 years that have missed, but it happens. And when it does, it always throws a monkey wrench into stuff. So your, choices are really try and work it out with the existing buyer or go back to market. That's really what it comes down to. And I kind of went through a number of ways that you can work it out with the existing buyer. But then again, of course, there's always the nuclear option, which is screw it. You know what? We just can't come to an agreement, and then you put it back on market. But then, of course, you have your inevitable sale fail on market too, which nobody wants. So it's kind of a tough spot. And so ideally, if you can meet an appraiser out there ahead of time, you can talk to them, you can get them everything that they need in terms of what's been done to the house, and really just get their contact information and open a dialogue with them. That can really help, because with the anonymity that's out there now, there's just some appraisers that just don't put the work in that they need to in order to do a good report, because they don't care, because the end buyer of their report is not who's giving them work. And I think that's a big problem. The appraisal management companies are the ones giving them work, not the end buyers or the sellers. And so they just don't care. You're their customer, but they don't serve you. And it's one of the very few businesses where, you're the customer, you're the one paying, but they have no allegiance to serve you in any way or give you any sort of good service. Our most recent appraisal is, case in point, right? You miss an appraisal by 1%. That's not very good service, because he very easily could have done that, but he doesn't care, right? He doesn't care, because he'll get another order next week or tomorrow or whatever from that same appraisal management company, and he'll just send off his reports into the black hole of whatever. So anyway, that's appraisals. It's a little bit of a dry topic, but hopefully you guys got some tactical stuff. You can use it to prevent low appraisals from coming in, and at the end of the day, save yourself some money. So hopefully you enjoyed this topic, and you got a little bit out of it. All right, guys, this is going to wrap up this week's episode of the Real Dealz podcast. I know at the beginning I mentioned a few things that was like yesterday. It was really last week. I know I recorded that intro last week, but, you get the point. But I do want to thank Tarl and everybody at the Fixated Crew for having me up last week to speak at the event. Had a great time, met a lot of you guys, saw some of you that I know, and it's always fun to do those types of things. So I hope to do many more as time allows. Which is tough right now for sure. But it was a busy week. And then also I went to the block party this past week, which I didn't mention in the intro, which is basically the kickoff party for the Street of Dreams here in Portland. So if you want to hear how that went, you can make sure to check out our Portland Real Estate Podcast, which is new episodes dropping here later this week as well. And I'll go through everything that we saw there. So that pretty much is going to wrap up this week's show. But before I leave you, I want to leave you with a quote. And this week's quote I felt was very relevant, because when you have low appraisals come in, you have to be a good conversationalist. You have to deal with problems head on in order to kind of massage them through and really get a deal to the finish line, if you are going to get that deal to the finish line. And so this week's quote is by a woman named Dorothy Neville. I think Neville, we'll call it. Anyway, maybe that's her, maybe not. But the quote is good. And the quote is, "The real art of conversation is not only to say the right thing in the right place, but to leave unsaid the wrong thing at a tempting moment." You ever had that feeling where you're just like, I just want to say something, but I should shut up? Well, I have it all the time. But anyway, I like that quote. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this week's show. You got some tactical information. You can prevent some low appraisals. I'll see you all next week.